College girls like her are always looking for attention after a party gone wrong. Chief Stafford's condescending tone filled the bright conference room as he briefed the morning shift under harsh fluorescent lighting. Captain Sophia Nakamura watched uncomfortably as Stafford continued his character assassination. Serena Blackwell probably doesn't even remember what really happened, but she needs someone in uniform to blame for her poor choices. He gestured dismissively, his confidence absolute in the natural daylight streaming through the windows. The truth is, she's embarrassed and trying to save face with Mommy and Daddy. Stafford had no idea that Mommy and Daddy included the most powerful law enforcement official in the country, or that his casual dismissal was being recorded by an internal affairs investigation already in motion. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. As Chief Richard Stafford leaned into the podium, a weathered face he has worn for decades of authority, he adjusted his long-sleeve police uniform. The morning briefing room was buzzing with shift change energy, though something felt amiss on the day. Captain Sophia Nakamura adjusted in her chair with her dark eyes focusing on the case file laid down before her. The fluorescent overhead lights make the place look raw, so raw you can almost touch the tension. 3 nights ago, Stafford continued with the practiced tone of bureaucratic dismissal. During a traffic stop, the Miss Blackwell claims that she got assaulted. He pronounced the word claims with particular contempt. But let's take a look at the facts. Downtown, college student was driving erratically, out late at night. Police officers Derek Holloway and Marcus Webb effectuate a model traffic stop of a belligerent subject who becomes combative. Officer James Kowalski sat in the back row, his rookie uniform crisp and his conscience heavy. He'd seen the photographs from the hospital. Those weren't injuries from someone being combative. Those were injuries from someone being brutalized. The fluorescent lighting seemed to grow harsher as Stafford continued his narrative construction. Miss Blackwell sustained minor injuries during the lawful arrest process, nothing more than what any resisting suspect might experience. She was processed, released, and chose to seek medical attention the following morning. Now she's crafting stories about excessive force to cover her own embarrassment. Captain Nakamura finally spoke, her voice careful but pointed. "Chief, have you reviewed Dr. Foster's medical report? The injuries documented seem quite extensive for a routine arrest." Stafford's jaw tightened slightly, but his dismissive smile never wavered. "Hospital reports can be subjective, Captain. Dr. Foster is known for her dramatic interpretations. A few bruises become assault allegations when filtered through certain perspectives." But James Kowalski remembered what he'd witnessed 3 nights earlier. The memory played in his mind like a horror film he couldn't turn off. The scene had unfolded under the bright streetlights of Maple Avenue, the kind of harsh illumination that left nowhere to hide. Serena Blackwell had been driving home from her part-time job at the campus library, her red sweater and blue jeans making her look exactly like what she was, a hard-working college student finishing another late shift. Her old Honda had a taillight out, nothing more serious than a $10 fix and a warning ticket. Officer Derek Holloway had different ideas. That night, James had been riding Observer, still learning the ropes, from a 15-year veteran named Holloway, who was aggressive in his policing. It all seemed normal when they pulled Serena over. The driver was polite. Her hands were visibly on the steering wheel. She was just the kind of cooperative citizen who should have made everyone's night easier. Holloway approached the window with an air that suggested he was looking to cause trouble, not avoid it. "License and registration," he barked, his voice seemingly getting more intense than necessary. Serena had complied immediately, her voice steady and respectful. "Is there a problem, officer? I know my taillight is out. I was planning to fix it this weekend." That respectful tone had seemed to irritate Holloway even more. "Step out of the vehicle," he'd ordered, his hand already moving toward his weapon. in a gesture designed to intimidate. The situation had spiraled from there with sickening speed. Holloway claimed he smelled alcohol, though James had detected nothing. He demanded field sobriety tests that Serena passed with flying colors. He'd searched her car and found nothing more incriminating than textbooks and library supplies. But instead of backing down, Holloway had doubled down, his partner Marcus Webb following his lead like a loyal attack dog. The beating was so quick that James barely registered what he was looking at. At one moment, Serena stood by her car, looking confused. In the next instant, she was down on the ground, with Holloway's knee into her back, and Webb delivering punches that were unrelated to the law, but rather connected to thuggery. James froze, dutiful training at war with conscience, rookie status making him feel powerless to intervene. Serena Blackwell was unconscious at the end of it all, with her face swollen beyond recognition and her red sweater torn and bloodied. In the debriefing room, Stafford's voice interrupted James's ghostly recollections. All reports have been filed and reviewed. The matter is resolved. The behavior of officers Holloway and Webb was professional and fitting as per department standards. Miss Blackwell's claims are groundless and will be treated as such. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their harsh brightness seeming to expose every lie being constructed in real time. Captain Nakamura's expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable throughout the briefing, her loyalty to the department warring with her growing suspicions about the official narrative. But what about the witness statements? She pressed, referring to the paperwork in front of her. There are significant inconsistencies in the timeline. Stafford's smile grew colder. Witness statements from intoxicated college students at 2 in the morning? Hardly reliable sources, Captain. We deal in facts here, not campus gossip and social media speculation. The dismissal was calculated and complete, designed to shut down any further questioning. But Captain Nakamura had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize a cover-up when she saw one, and the pieces weren't adding up. Dr. Amanda Foster's medical report lay on her desk, a damning catalog of injuries that painted a picture of systematic brutality. Facial contusions consistent with repeated blows, bruised ribs suggesting kicks to the torso, defensive wounds on the hands and arms, the kind of comprehensive trauma that didn't happen during routine arrests. The emergency room doctor was professional and careful with his documentation, taking pictures of every injury he found. Stafford's affidavit read like a roadmap of police brutality, with each wound revealing a part of the story that Stafford was trying so hard to conceal. However, for longer than most people knew, Stafford had been covering police wrongdoing. Inside of hours of Serena's hospitalization, he was on the phone with witnesses, sanitizing reports, creating the narrative that would shield his officers and department from scrutiny. Prior to reaching Captain Nakamura's desk, the police report was rewritten 2 times. Security footage from nearby businesses went missing. Officers had paid visits to potential witnesses, strongly urging them not to share their observations. It was a masterclass in institutional cover-up, done with such precision only a repeated act could create. Corruption had become an art form for Stafford, and Serena Blackwell had merely become another canvas. As the briefing ended and the officers filed out to start their shifts, James Kowalski sank deeper into his seat, the weight of his conscience growing heavier. The photos he had secretly clicked at the scene are saved in his phone and could blow up Stafford's lies. Captain Nakamura gathered her files slowly, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd heard. The medical evidence didn't lie, regardless of Stafford's dismissive attitude toward Dr. Foster's report. Someone had brutalized Serena Blackwell, and the department's response was to blame the victim and close ranks around the perpetrators. The fluorescent lights continued to hum overhead as the conference room emptied, their harsh brightness illuminating the institutional corruption that was about to face its greatest challenge. Because while Chief Stafford was busy constructing his narrative and protecting his officers, he had no idea that Serena Blackwell was more than just another college student he could dismiss and discredit. She was a federal witness whose safety was paramount to national security. She was the daughter of the most powerful law enforcement official in the country, and she was about to become the catalyst that would bring down everything Stafford had spent decades building. The case was far from closed. In fact, it was just beginning. The morning sunlight streamed through Captain Sophia Nakamura's office windows, casting long rectangles of light across her desk as she spread out the incident reports from 3 nights ago. Officer Derek Holloway's account claimed Serena Blackwell had been combative and resisted arrest. His partner's report echoed the same narrative, almost word for word, word for word. Sophia realized as she compared the documents line by line. The timestamps didn't match the dispatch logs. The descriptions of the suspect's behavior read like carbon copies of each other, lacking the natural variation that came from genuine eyewitness accounts. Sophia leaned back in her chair, the weight of realization settling in her chest like a stone. She had been a police officer for 15 years, climbing through the ranks by following the rules and trusting the system, but these reports felt wrong in every way that mattered. Serena Blackwell stood in another government building on the other side of town. The bright lights overhead illuminated her red blouse, which stood out even more against her dark skin. The folder contained medical records and pictures of her injuries, as well as a handwritten statement she spent hours altering. She wore dark jeans. The official looking at her did not really raise his head from the computer. "I need to file additional complaints about my assault," Serena said, sliding the folder through the metal tray. The initial report was incomplete and contains false information. The clerk, a middle-aged white woman with graying hair, glanced at the papers without really seeing them. "You'll need to speak with Detective Morrison about amending existing reports. He's not available today. Try again next week." "Next week? This is urgent. I was beaten unconscious by police officers, and they're covering it up." "Next week," said the clerk, pushing the folder back through the tray, with the expression of someone who has perfected the tactic of being unhelpful. Serena held on to her folder, feeling the same sense of helplessness and anger she had come to rely on since the assault. Every door she tried to engage with seemed intended to close in her face. Meanwhile, down at the police station, Officer James Kowalski sat in the break room of the station. His short-sleeve uniform was rumpled from a night of not sleeping, and the lights above him were glaring on the dark circles under his eyes. He stared at his phone, thumb hovering over the camera icon. James' thoughts were muffled by the hum of the refrigerator as his locker held the photographs from that night, the photographs which showed the blood on the pavement, which contradicted every report. The break room door opened, and Derek Holloway walked in, his swagger intact despite everything that had happened.
"Kowalski, you look like hell, rookie. Still losing sleep over that drug dealer from the other night?"
James looked up, studying Holloway's face for any sign of remorse or concern. He found nothing but casual indifference. "She wasn't a drug dealer. We never found any drugs." "Details." Holloway shrugged, pouring himself coffee. "Point is, she learned her lesson about resisting arrest. Chief Stafford handled it perfectly. Case closed." The carefree way that James brushed off what he had seen turned his stomach. After Holloway's departure, he took out his phone and began photographing the evidence he had collected. With each click of the camera, he felt a bit of rebellion against everything he had been taught about loyalty and chain of command. Detective Rachel Okonkwo knocked on Captain Nakamura's doorframe, her presence commanding attention even in the bright natural light streaming through the windows. She wore a green shirt under her blue jacket and carried a thick file folder that she set down on Sophia's desk with deliberate weight. "We need to talk about the Blackwell case," Rachel said, closing the door behind her. "Internal Affairs has some questions." Sophia felt her pulse quicken. What kind of questions? The kind that come up when medical reports don't match incident reports, when witness statements contradict police accounts, when a routine traffic stop sends someone to the emergency room with severe head trauma. Rachel sat down across from Sophia, her dark eyes serious. I've been investigating complaints about this unit for months. This case is the tip of something much larger. How much larger? That depends on what you tell me. Because right now, I'm seeing a pattern of excessive force, falsified reports, and systematic cover-ups, and it all traces back to direct orders from Chief Stafford. Sophia clenched her fingers around the incident reports she reviewed. The evidence was plain to see and obvious as soon as you knew what you were looking at. What do you require from me? Everything. The real deal. Meanwhile, in a small law office on the other side of town, attorney Patricia Wynn sat across from Serena Blackwell in a conference room with a nice skylight. Patricia was wearing a white shirt and a black blazer. She was looking serious while going through the medical papers and the photographs that Serena had brought. This is not a simple excessive force case, Patricia said, setting down the emergency room report. This is attempted murder with a badge. Tell me everything from the beginning. Serena took a shaky breath, her red blouse rising and falling as she gathered her courage. The bright lighting made every emotion visible on her face as she began to speak. I was driving home from my job at the campus library. I work there 20 hours a week while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in my criminal justice program. Her voice was steady at first, clinical. I volunteer at the community center teaching kids to read. I've never been arrested, never used drugs, never even had a parking ticket. Patricia made notes of this, already anticipating the character assassination to follow. Could you tell me what happened during the stop? From the onset, Officer Holloway came up to my car aggressively. They were looking for an excuse to blow up, asking him why I was being pulled over. He opened my door and ordered me to get out of the car. I followed all orders, but nothing I did was quick enough or respectful enough. Serena's demeanor started to break down as she went on. He pushed me with force against my car that I saw stars. Then his partner joined in. They just kept yelling I was resisting arrest, but I wasn't residing. I just tried to breathe. The warmth of the sun filtered through the window, brightening up the room. It didn't quite fit with what Serena was saying. Patricia stretched out her arm across the table and touched her client. They attacked me until I fell down. Then they assaulted me until I lost consciousness. The last thing I recall was my face hitting the cement and tasting blood. Serena's voice broke completely now, months of suppressed trauma finally coming out in tears that she had been too proud and too angry to shed until now. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital with a concussion, fractured bones in my face, and bruises covering half my body. According to their report, I was allegedly the aggressor, said Serena. She gave Patricia a tissue, and Patricia's anger turned cold. She had worked on police beatings, but the systemic nature of this was extraordinary. We will destroy them, said Patricia quietly. Every last one of them involved in this cover-up is going to pay. Chief Stafford paced his office. He looked like a caged animal under the fluorescent lights. His long-sleeved uniform was still pressed, but he already was beginning to get sweat stains at the collar. I don't care what internal affairs think they're investigating. He barked into the phone. That girl is a problem that needs to go away quietly. In the past, we have dealt with this kind of situation. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. When Captain Nakamura answered, his voice took on a false paternal tone. Sophia, I hear Detective Okonkwo has been asking you questions about the Blackwell incident. I hope you remember where your loyalties lie. You've worked too hard to make Captain to throw it all away over some party girl looking for a payday. On the other end of the line, Sophia stared at the evidence spread across her desk. The inconsistent reports, the medical records that painted a picture of savage brutality, the witness statements that had been buried or ignored. Chief, I think we need to discuss some discrepancies in the incident reports. Stafford's voice turned ice cold. There are no discrepancies. There's only the official version of events, which you will support completely, unless you'd prefer to explain to your mortgage company why you're suddenly unemployed. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Sophia had 2 kids in college and elderly parents who depended on her health insurance. But she also had a conscience that was making it impossible to sleep at night. I understand, she said finally, but her voice carried a note that made Stafford pause. Good. Remember, Sophia, loyalty is the only thing that matters in this job. After hanging up, Sophia sat in her sun-drenched office and made a decision that would change everything. She picked up her phone and dialed Detective Okonkwo's direct number. Rachel? It's Sophia. We need to meet tonight. And bring your recorder. Miles away, in a federal building that Serena Blackwell had never seen and didn't know existed, a computer algorithm flagged her name in a routine security sweep. The automated system noted unusual police activity involving a protected witness and generated a priority alert that appeared on a classified terminal. Carlos Mendez, a muscular Latino federal agent with a green shirt under his blue jacket, felt his blood run cold upon glancing at the alert with further information. He pulled out his secured phone to make a call that would unleash forces more alarming than Chief Stafford's scariest nightmare. The cracks in Stafford's foundation were spreading faster than he could contain them. Truth had a way of finding light, no matter how many people tried to bury it in darkness. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., in an office that commanded respect from every law enforcement agency in the country, a phone was about to ring with news that would make a father's protective fury the least of Chief Stafford's problems. The reckoning was coming, whether he was ready or not. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the federal building as Agent Carlos Mendez stepped into the FBI field office, his muscular frame filling out a crisp green shirt beneath his blue jacket. The overhead fluorescent lights cast everything in sharp relief as he moved with purposeful strides toward the secure briefing room, a classified manila folder tucked under his arm. Carlos had been with the Bureau for 12 years, specializing in domestic terrorism cases. But something about this morning felt different. The urgent call from his supervisor had pulled him away from his current investigation into suspected extremist cells operating on college campuses throughout the region. What he was about to discover would change everything. He settled into a chair beneath the bright office lighting and opened the classified file marked Blackwell Serena Protected Witness Status Clearance Level 4. As his eyes scanned the first page, his expression shifted from routine professional interest to sharp concern. Serena Blackwell wasn't just another college student. She was a crucial federal witness who had provided intelligence that potentially saved hundreds of lives. 3 months earlier, Serena had been working her part-time job at the university library when she'd noticed unusual patterns in computer usage by a group of graduate students. Late-night sessions, encrypted communications, and suspicious research into campus security protocols had caught her attention. Her decision to report these observations to campus security had set in motion a federal investigation that uncovered a sophisticated terrorism cell planning coordinated attacks on multiple universities. The file detailed Serena's courage during extensive federal interviews, her precise memory of conversations she'd overheard, and her ability to identify key players in the conspiracy. Her testimony had been instrumental in preventing what intelligence analysts believed would have been the largest domestic terrorism attack since 9/11. The case was still active, with several suspects yet to be apprehended, making her continued protection paramount to national security. Carlos felt his jaw tighten as he read the latest intelligence report. 3 days ago, their protected witness had been brutally beaten by local police officers during what should have been a routine traffic stop. The federal monitoring system that tracked protected witnesses had flagged her hospitalization, but the local police report dismissed the incident as minor injuries sustained during lawful arrest procedures. He reached for his secure phone and dialed the field office's intelligence coordinator. "This is Mendez. I need everything we have on the Blackwell incident from 3 nights ago, and I need it now." While waiting for the files to arrive, Carlos reviewed Serena's psychological profile. The young woman had already endured months of stress from her witness protection status, carefully balancing her college life with regular federal debriefings and security protocols. She'd been assured that her cooperation would be rewarded with protection, that the federal government would keep her safe while she helped bring dangerous terrorists to justice. Now she'd been beaten unconscious by the very law enforcement system that was supposed to protect her. The secure fax machine hummed to life, delivering hospital records that painted a devastating picture. Severe concussion, broken ribs, facial lacerations, and internal bruising consistent with prolonged physical assault. Dr. Amanda Foster's medical report made it clear that Serena's injuries were far more serious than the police had indicated in their sanitized version of events. Carlos's phone rang, the caller ID showing his supervisor's extension. "Agent Mendez, I need you to understand the sensitivity of this situation. Ms. Blackwell's testimony is crucial to preventing additional attacks. If word gets out that we can't protect our witnesses, our entire domestic terrorism program could be compromised." "Understood, sir. What are my parameters?" "Full federal investigation, but keep it contained. We can't have local law enforcement knowing about the terrorism connection until we determine how deep this corruption goes. For all we know, some of these officers could be connected to the suspects we haven't apprehended yet." Across town, Chief Stafford sat in his office under the harsh fluorescent lighting, completely unaware that his carefully constructed cover-up had just attracted the attention of federal investigators. He was focused on his immediate problem, which was ensuring that Serena Blackwell's assault disappeared from public consciousness. He picked up his phone and dialed the hospital's administrative office. "This is Police Chief Stafford. I need to speak with someone about correcting some errors in medical records from 3 nights ago. We have a situation where a suspect's injuries were mischaracterized, and I need those records to reflect the actual circumstances of the arrest." The hospital administrator's voice carried uncertainty. "Chief Stafford, our medical staff is very thorough in documenting injuries. Dr. Foster specifically noted that the patient's injuries were consistent with severe physical trauma." "Dr. Foster made assumptions based on incomplete information," Stafford replied, his voice carrying the authority of decades in law enforcement. "The suspect was combative and sustained injuries while resisting arrest. I have witness statements from my officers that contradict the current medical assessment." After ending the call, Stafford leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his progress. He'd already spoken with the tow truck driver who'd witnessed part of the incident, making it clear that cooperation with the police department's version of events would be remembered favorably. A few potential witnesses from nearby businesses had received similar visits from his officers, ensuring their silence. Meanwhile, Officer James Kowalski sat in his patrol car, parked in the bright sunlight outside a coffee shop, his short-sleeved uniform shirt already damp with nervous sweat. Despite the morning coolness, the photographs he'd secretly taken at the scene 3 nights ago felt like they were burning a hole in his phone's memory. He'd joined the force to serve and protect, not to participate in cover-ups of police brutality. The images were damning. Serena Blackwell's car showed no signs of damage that would indicate she'd rammed it into Officer Holloway. Contrary to his report, the blood spatter patterns contradicted claims that she'd fallen during the arrest. Most importantly, the photographs clearly showed that Serena had been unconscious when the beating stopped, making any claims of ongoing resistance obviously false. James made his decision. He encrypted the files and sent them to the Internal Affairs anonymous tip line, along with a detailed account of what he'd witnessed that night. His message was brief but comprehensive, outlining every discrepancy between what he'd seen and what appeared in the official reports. In her sunlit office, Captain Sophia Nakamura was conducting her own investigation into the department's recent cases. What she discovered made her stomach turn. The Serena Blackwell incident wasn't an isolated occurrence. Over the past 5 years, under Chief Stafford's leadership, there had been 17 complaints of excessive force that had been dismissed without proper investigation. The pattern was always the same. Initial complaints would be filed. Then witnesses would recant their statements. Medical records would be amended to downplay injuries, and the investigating officers would conclude that no misconduct had occurred. In every case, Chief Stafford had personally overseen the investigations, ensuring that his officers faced no consequences for their actions. Sophia realized she was looking at evidence of systematic corruption that went far beyond a single incident. Chief Stafford had created an environment where officers knew they could use excessive force without facing accountability as long as they remained loyal to his administration. Back at the federal building, Agent Carlos Mendez was coordinating the most sensitive operation of his career. Under the bright office lighting, he spread surveillance photos and intelligence reports across a secure conference table, building a comprehensive picture of the local police department's corruption. His first step was placing the entire department under covert federal surveillance. Within hours, FBI technical specialists had deployed monitoring equipment that would track all communications, document all activities, and record every conversation that took place within the police station. If Chief Stafford was attempting to obstruct justice in a federal terrorism case, Carlos would have evidence of every illegal action. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Stafford believed he was covering up a simple case of police brutality, he was actually obstructing a federal terrorism investigation and intimidating a protected witness. The federal charges that could result from this cover-up would make the original assault seem minor by comparison. Serena Blackwell sat in her small apartment, unaware of the federal machinery now working to protect her. She wore a red sweater and blue jacket, trying to maintain some normalcy by attending her classes. But the panic attacks were becoming more frequent. Every unexpected sound made her heart race. Every police siren triggered memories of that terrible night. She'd tried to file additional complaints about the assault, but every office she visited seemed to have already heard Chief Stafford's version of events. Bureaucratic stonewalling met her at every turn, with officials suggesting that perhaps she should reconsider her accusations against respected police officers. What Serena didn't know was that Agent Carlos Mendez was already arranging for her protection. Federal marshals were being briefed on her case, safe house locations were being secured, and a team of federal prosecutors was reviewing the evidence that would soon bring her attackers to justice. As the morning progressed, the various threads of investigation began converging. Officer Kowalski's photographic evidence reached Detective Rachel Okonkwo in Internal Affairs, providing concrete proof of the cover-up. Captain Nakamura's research into systematic corruption gave federal investigators a broader context for understanding Stafford's criminal enterprise. Most importantly, Agent Carlos Mendez was preparing to escalate the investigation to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. His secure report to FBI headquarters would trigger a response that Chief Stafford couldn't possibly anticipate or control. The chapter's tension reached its peak as Carlos picked up his secure phone to place a call that would change everything. The number he dialed connected directly to FBI headquarters in Washington, to an office that few agents ever had reason to contact. "This is Agent Mendez, Field Office 7. I need to report a critical incident involving a protected witness. The situation requires immediate attention from the director's office." As he waited for the call to be transferred, Carlos looked out at the bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the office windows. Somewhere across town, Chief Stafford was continuing his cover-up, completely unaware that he'd just attracted the attention of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. The game was about to change completely, and justice was finally within reach. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Millbrook Police Department, casting sharp rectangles of natural light across the worn linoleum floors. The fluorescent fixtures buzzed overhead, adding their harsh illumination to the already bright interior. Chief Stafford sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing incident reports with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had successfully buried an inconvenient truth. 3 days had passed since he had dismissed Serena Blackwell's assault case, and the media attention had already begun to fade. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The first sign that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse came in the form of heavy footsteps echoing through the station's main corridor. Stafford glanced up from his paperwork, his weathered face creased with mild annoyance at the disturbance. Through his office window, he could see several figures in dark suits moving with purposeful determination past the reception desk. The duty sergeant looked confused, gesturing helplessly as the suited men ignored his attempts to direct them to the visitor check-in. Agent Carlos Mendez led the group, his muscular frame evident beneath his green shirt and blue jacket. His dark eyes swept the station interior with professional assessment, taking note of every exit, every potential point of resistance. Behind him, 3 other federal agents moved in formation, their bearing unmistakably that of seasoned law enforcement officers who answered to a much higher authority than the local police chief, currently scrambling to understand what was happening. Stafford rose from his chair as his office door swung open without ceremony. Carlos Mendez stepped inside, his presence immediately dominating the space despite the bright overhead lighting that had always given Stafford a sense of control during interrogations and confrontations. The federal agent's credentials appeared in his hand with practiced efficiency. "Chief Stafford, I'm Agent Carlos Mendez, FBI. We need to discuss Serena Blackwell." The confidence that had sustained Stafford through decades of corruption began to waver. His pale blue eyes darted between the federal badge and the agent's impassive face, searching for some indication of what had brought the FBI to his station. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Agent Mendez. Miss Blackwell filed a complaint that we investigated thoroughly and found to be without merit." Carlos Mendez placed a manila folder on Stafford's desk, the sound unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense office. "We'll need all records related to Miss Blackwell's case, traffic stop reports, incident documentation, medical records, witness statements, internal communications, everything." "Now wait just a minute," Stafford blustered, his face reddening as he attempted to reassert his authority. "You can't just walk into my station and demand files. There are protocols, procedures. If you want our records, you'll need to go through proper channels." The federal warrant appeared in Carlos Mendez's hand with the same smooth efficiency as his credentials had moments before. The official seal and judicial signature seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. "These are the proper channels, Chief. We have full federal authorization for all materials related to this investigation." Stafford's hands trembled slightly as he examined the warrant, his mind racing through the implications. Federal interest meant this case had escalated far beyond his ability to contain it through local political connections and bureaucratic stonewalling. The systematic cover-up that had seemed so airtight 3 days ago now felt as fragile as tissue paper. Across the station, Officer Derek Holloway looked up from his desk to see federal agents spreading throughout the building. His face went ashen as he recognized the scope of their presence. This wasn't a courtesy visit or a routine inquiry. This was a full federal investigation, and every instinct honed through years of corruption told him that his carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. Panic overrode reason as Derek pushed back from his desk, his chair clattering against the wall. Several officers looked up in surprise as he moved quickly toward the rear exit, his casual stride gradually accelerating into an unmistakable flight response. He had almost reached the back door when a firm hand landed on his shoulder. "Officer Holloway?" The federal agent's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to compliance. "We'd like to speak with you." Derek's attempt to pull away was met with professional restraint that left no doubt about the futility of resistance. Within moments, he found himself seated in an interview room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as his world systematically unraveled. The confident aggressor, who had brutalized an innocent college student just 3 nights earlier, had transformed into a sweating, desperate man whose career and freedom hung by rapidly fraying threads. Captain Sophia Nakamura stood in her office doorway, watching the federal takeover with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The moral weight that had pressed down on her for the past 3 days began to lift as she realized that forces beyond Stafford's influence had finally arrived. When Carlos Mendez approached her, she was ready. "Captain Nakamura, I understand you've had concerns about the Blackwell case." Her response came without hesitation. "Agent Mendez, I've been documenting irregularities in this case since the initial incident reports were filed. Chief Stafford's handling of this matter has been problematic from the beginning." The evidence she provided painted a devastating picture of institutional corruption, falsified reports, intimidated witnesses, suppressed medical evidence, and systematic attempts to discredit the victim. Each document she handed over represented another nail in Stafford's coffin, another piece of proof that federal intervention had been not just warranted, but essential. Detective Rachel Okonkwo emerged from her office, carrying several thick folders, her expression grim but determined. The natural skylight streaming through the station windows illuminated her dark face as she approached Carlos Mendez with the methodical precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment. "Agent Mendez, I'm Detective Okonkwo, Internal Affairs. I've been building a case against Chief Stafford for the past 6 months. The Blackwell incident was just the latest in a pattern of corruption and cover-ups that spans several years." Her files contained evidence of witness tampering, evidence suppression, false testimony, and systematic abuse of authority. The Blackwell case hadn't been an anomaly, but rather the most recent example of Stafford's willingness to sacrifice justice for personal and political convenience. Meanwhile, across town, Serena Blackwell sat in her small apartment, attempting to focus on her constitutional law textbook. The bright afternoon sun streamed through her windows, casting warm light across her red blouse and dark pants, but she found herself reading the same paragraph repeatedly. The trauma of her assault, combined with the frustration of institutional dismissal, had left her feeling isolated and powerless. The knock at her door came as a complete surprise. Through the peephole, she saw 2 individuals in professional attire, their bearing suggesting law enforcement but not local police. When she opened the door, their credentials identified them as federal agents. "Miss Blackwell, we're here to discuss your safety. There are aspects of your situation that require federal protection." Confusion clouded her features as she invited them inside. Federal protection made no sense in the context of a local police brutality case. Regardless of how egregious the violations had been, the agents' explanations were careful and measured, revealing enough to justify their presence while maintaining operational security about details she wasn't yet cleared to understand. "Miss Blackwell, you've been providing assistance to federal authorities in an ongoing investigation. Recent events have compromised your security, and we're here to ensure your continued safety." The revelation that her cooperation with campus security about suspicious individuals had escalated into federal witness status left her reeling. The assault that had seemed like random police brutality suddenly took on more sinister dimensions. Had her attackers known about her federal cooperation? Was the beating intended as more than just routine abuse of authority? Back at the police station, Chief Stafford's attempts to contact his political allies were meeting with increasingly desperate responses. Phone calls that would have been returned immediately just days earlier now went to voicemail. Political figures who had once been eager to curry favor with the powerful police chief were suddenly unavailable or too busy to take his calls. Mayor Vincent Hargrove's response was particularly telling. "Chief, I think it would be best if you handled this situation without involving the mayor's office. Federal investigations require a certain degree of independence from local political considerations. The message was clear. Stafford's political protection had evaporated the moment federal badges appeared at his station. Decades of cultivated relationships and accumulated favors meant nothing when faced with the prospect of federal scrutiny. His allies were distancing themselves with the speed of politicians sensing a career-ending scandal. Lieutenant Brian Castillo, Stafford's most loyal enforcer, watched the federal investigation unfold with growing unease. His long-sleeved uniform suddenly felt constricting as he realized that loyalty to a corrupt chief might not be worth destroying his own career. The whispered conversations with other officers revealed a growing consensus that Stafford's protection was no longer worth the risk of federal prosecution. As the afternoon wore on, the scope of the federal interest became increasingly apparent. This wasn't a routine civil rights investigation or a bureaucratic review of local police procedures. The number of agents, the comprehensive nature of their warrants, and the systematic way they were dismantling Stafford's carefully constructed narrative suggested something far more significant. Agent Carlos Mendez made his way to a secure area of the station, producing an encrypted phone with practiced efficiency. The call he placed went directly to a number in Washington that bypassed normal FBI channels. When the connection was established, his voice carried the weight of someone reporting to the highest levels of federal authority. "Director, this is Agent Mendez reporting from Millbrook. We've secured the scene and established federal control of the investigation. The local cover-up was extensive, but we have multiple officers willing to cooperate in exchange for consideration. The systematic corruption goes back years." He paused, listening to questions from the other end of the call, before continuing with the words that would transform this from a federal investigation into a personal mission of the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. "Sir, I can confirm that the director's daughter has been located and is safe. We've established protective protocols, and she's being briefed on the security implications of her situation. However, sir, the extent of her injuries and the systematic attempt to cover up the assault, I think you need to see the medical reports personally." The silence on the other end of the call stretched for long moments before a response came that would seal Chief Stafford's fate and set in motion a reckoning that would reshape the entire department. "Agent Mendez, I'll be arriving personally to oversee this investigation, ensure that every piece of evidence is preserved and every witness is protected. No one involved in harming my daughter will escape justice." The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the secure federal facility conference room as Agent Carlos Mendez adjusted his green shirt and straightened his blue jacket. His muscular frame filled the doorway as he entered, carrying a classified file that had just changed everything. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like a physical force. Carlos had made difficult calls before, had delivered bad news to families, had reported mission failures to superiors. But this call was different. This call would reach the highest levels of federal law enforcement and deliver news that would unleash forces beyond anything the small-town police department could comprehend. He sat down at the secure video terminal, the bright overhead lighting casting sharp shadows across his weathered face. Years of federal service had prepared him for many situations, but not this one. Not calling the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation to tell him that his daughter had been brutally beaten by corrupt police officers. The encryption protocols engaged as the call connected, and within moments, FBI Director Marcus Blackwell appeared on the high-definition screen. Even through the video feed, his presence was commanding. The distinguished man wore a crisp blue jacket over his muscular frame, his build still suggesting the years of fieldwork that had brought him to this pinnacle of law enforcement. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his jaw set with the authority of someone who controlled one of the most powerful agencies in the world. "Agent Mendez." Director Blackwell's voice carried through the speakers with professional courtesy. "Your report mentioned an urgent matter requiring my immediate attention. What's the situation? Carlos took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would shatter the professional composure of the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. Sir, 3 nights ago, a young woman was brutally beaten during a traffic stop by officers from the Millbrook Police Department. The local police chief has orchestrated a systematic cover-up, falsifying reports and intimidating witnesses. Director Blackwell's expression remained neutral, though Carlos could see the slight tightening around his eyes. That's unfortunate, Agent Mendez, but local police corruption typically falls under different jurisdictions unless there are federal implications. Sir, Carlos continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. The victim is a protected federal witness. She provided crucial intelligence in Operation Nightfall, the terrorism investigation that prevented the campus attacks last month. Now Director Blackwell leaned forward slightly, his attention fully focused. Continue. Carlos opened the classified file, even though he had memorized every detail. The witness has been living under light protection while attending college. Her handler maintained regular contact, but she was operating under standard witness protocols. 3 nights ago, she was driving home from her part-time job when officers Derek Holloway and his partner pulled her over. Agent Mendez. Director Blackwell's voice carried a warning edge. I need you to be very specific about this witness. What's her name? The moment had arrived. Carlos looked directly into the camera, knowing that what happened next would reverberate through every level of federal and local law enforcement. Sir, the witness is Serena Blackwell. She's your daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Director Blackwell's face transformed, professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles whitening as the full impact of the revelation hit him. When he spoke again, his voice was barely controlled, fury building beneath the surface like molten lava. My daughter was beaten by police officers? Each word was measured, precise, and filled with a rage that made Carlos grateful he was hundreds of miles away. Yes, sir. Hospital records show severe facial lacerations, broken ribs, and a concussion. The attending physician, Dr. Amanda Foster, documented injuries consistent with a brutal assault. Chief Stafford immediately began covering up the incident, pressuring officers to falsify reports and dismiss your daughter as an attention-seeking party girl. Director Blackwell stood slowly, his muscular frame rigid with controlled fury. The blue jacket stretched across his shoulders as he began to pace, the camera following his movement. How long has this cover-up been ongoing? 3 days, sir. Chief Stafford has systematically discredited every aspect of your daughter's account. He's pressured the hospital, intimidated witnesses, and convinced his department that she's lying for attention. They have no idea who she really is or what she's done for this country. The director stopped pacing, his face a mask of barely contained rage. My daughter helped expose a terrorist cell that was planning to bomb 3 university campuses. Her intelligence saved hundreds of lives, and these corrupt officers beat her unconscious and then tried to destroy her credibility? That's correct, sir. The local police have no knowledge of Operation Nightfall or Serena's witness status. To them, she's just another college student they can dismiss and discredit. Director Blackwell's professional training warred with his paternal instincts, and for a moment, Carlos saw the father overcome the federal official. Where is she now? Is she safe? We've moved her to a secure location. She's physically recovering, though she's been experiencing trauma responses. Sir, she doesn't know that you're aware of the situation. She doesn't even know that we've connected her witness status to the assault. I want to see her. Now, Carlos had anticipated this request. Sir, I can arrange a secure video connection. She's in our safe house about 20 minutes from here. Do it. While Carlos coordinated the connection, Director Blackwell's mind raced through the implications. His daughter, the brilliant young woman who had risked her life to provide intelligence about domestic terrorists, had been brutally assaulted by the very law enforcement officers sworn to protect her. The cover-up added insult to injury. attempting to destroy her character and credibility. The screen split, and suddenly Serena appeared in the frame. She wore a red sweater and jeans, her face still showing the fading bruises from the assault. When she saw her father on the screen, her composure crumbled. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident young woman who had bravely provided testimony against dangerous terrorists. "Serena, sweetheart." Director Blackwell's voice softened completely, the federal official disappearing entirely as the concerned father took over. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I didn't know they would call you. I didn't know the federal agents were there because of me. Dad, they said I was a protected witness, but I don't understand what's happening." Director Blackwell's heart broke, seeing his daughter's confusion and pain. "Honey, remember the information you provided about those students who were planning the campus attacks? That made you a federal witness. The agents are there to protect you." "But the police officers, Dad, they beat me unconscious and then told everyone I was lying. Chief Stafford said I was just looking for attention, that I was a party girl making up stories. They made me feel like I was crazy." The fury returned to Director Blackwell's eyes, though his voice remained gentle for his daughter. "Serena, you are one of the bravest people I know. The intelligence you provided saved hundreds of lives. Those officers who hurt you are going to face the full weight of federal justice." "I was so scared, Dad. When they were hitting me, I kept thinking about you, about how you taught me to be strong. But afterwards, when no one believed me, I started to doubt myself." "You never have to doubt yourself, sweetheart. You're a hero, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. More importantly, I'm going to make sure the people who hurt you and tried to destroy your credibility face consequences they never imagined." Carlos watched the reunion with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal emotion. He had seen many federal cases, but few with such clear lines between right and wrong, between justice and corruption. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, in the Millbrook police station, Chief Stafford was completely oblivious to the seismic forces now arrayed against him. Under the harsh fluorescent lighting of his office, he continued his campaign to pressure officers for loyalty and maintain the cover-up of Serena's assault. "I need everyone on the same page about this Blackwell girl," Stafford told Lieutenant Brian Castillo, his most trusted enforcer. "She's a troublemaker looking for a payday, nothing more. Any officer who starts questioning the official report will find their career in serious jeopardy." Lieutenant Castillo nodded, though privately he was beginning to have doubts about the chief's version of events. The federal agents who had arrived that morning were asking very specific questions, and their authority seemed to supersede anything the local department could muster. In another part of the station, Captain Sophia Nakamura was providing detailed testimony to federal investigators about the systematic cover-up she had witnessed. Under the bright natural lighting of the conference room, she laid out everything she knew about Stafford's corruption. Chief Stafford immediately took control of the incident report, she explained to the federal agents. He personally rewrote the officers' accounts and pressured everyone involved to stick to his version of events. When I tried to ask questions about the inconsistencies, he threatened my career. Officer James Kowalski, still in his short-sleeved uniform, sat in another interview room providing his own testimony. The photographs he had secretly taken were spread across the table, each one a piece of evidence in the growing federal case. "I knew something was wrong from the beginning," he told the investigators. "The official story didn't match what I saw at the scene. When I tried to document the evidence, I had to do it secretly because Chief Stafford had made it clear that questioning his narrative was career suicide." Back at the secure facility, Director Blackwell was learning the full scope of the terrorism case his daughter had helped crack. Carlos provided a detailed briefing about Operation Nightfall and the campus attack plot that Serena's intelligence had exposed. The terrorists were planning coordinated attacks on 3 major universities, Carlos explained. "Your daughter noticed suspicious behavior from students in her study group and reported it through proper channels. Her information led to surveillance that uncovered the entire network. Director Blackwell felt a surge of pride mixed with his anger. His daughter had shown incredible courage and civic responsibility, only to be brutally assaulted by the officers who should have been protecting her. The irony was not lost on him that while federal agents were praising her heroism, local police were destroying her reputation. "Sir," Carlos continued, "her safety was paramount to national security because the terrorist cell had planned additional attacks. Her testimony was crucial to the prosecution, which is why she was in witness protection, and these corrupt officers compromised a federal witness in a terrorism case while covering up their own criminal behavior," Director Blackwell summarized, his voice cold with fury. "That's correct, sir. Chief Stafford's cover-up has potentially interfered with national security interests while violating your daughter's civil rights." Director Blackwell looked back at the screen where his daughter was waiting, her bruised face a testament to both the brutality she had endured and the strength she had shown. The contrast between her actual heroism and Stafford's character assassination filled him with a rage he had rarely experienced in his decades of federal service. "Serena," he said gently, "I want you to know that what happened to you is not just a local police matter. This is now a federal investigation at the highest levels." "What does that mean, Dad?" "It means that Chief Stafford and his officers are about to discover that they didn't just assault a college student. They assaulted a federal witness and then obstructed justice in a terrorism investigation. It means they're going to face the full power of the federal government." Director Blackwell turned back to Carlos, his expression hardening into the mask of authority that had made him one of the most feared law enforcement officials in the country. "Agent Mendez, I'm ordering a complete federal takeover of this investigation. I want every federal resource brought to bear on this case." "Yes, sir." "What level of response are you authorizing?" "Full federal response. Civil rights violation, obstruction of justice, interference with a federal witness in a terrorism case. I want Chief Stafford and everyone involved in this cover-up to understand exactly what they've done and who they've crossed." Carlos felt a chill at the controlled fury in the director's voice. He had seen federal responses before, but never one ordered personally by the director of the FBI against officers who had assaulted his daughter. "Sir, I'll coordinate with all relevant agencies immediately. And Agent Mendez, I want this handled by the book, but I want it handled with the full weight of federal authority." These corrupt officers thought they could beat a young woman and destroy her credibility with no consequences. They're about to learn they were very, very wrong. As the call ended, Carlos began implementing the director's orders, knowing that by morning, Chief Stafford's world would be completely transformed. The small-town police chief who thought he could cover up the assault of a college student was about to discover he had declared war on the most powerful law enforcement official in America. The phone call that revealed Serena Blackwell's true identity had just unleashed forces that would bring federal justice crashing down on every officer involved in her assault and the subsequent cover-up. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Police Department, casting sharp rectangular patterns across the linoleum floor as Chief Stafford paced behind his desk, barking orders into his phone. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating every corner of his office in harsh, unforgiving brightness. He had spent another sleepless night coordinating his cover-up, confident that his decades of political connections would weather this federal storm. "I don't care what those federal boys think they know," Stafford growled into the receiver, his long-sleeved police uniform already wrinkled despite the early hour. "This is still my department, and I run things here." The sound of multiple vehicles pulling into the station parking lot made him glance toward the window. His blood ran cold. Black SUVs with federal plates surrounded the building like predators circling wounded prey. Agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, their movements precise and coordinated. Stafford's phone call forgotten. He watched in growing horror as a tall, distinguished black man stepped out of the lead vehicle. Even from 3 stories up, the man's presence commanded attention. His muscular build filled out a crisp blue jacket, and his silver hair caught the morning light as he surveyed the police station with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Sir, are you still there?" The voice on the phone crackled. Stafford hung up without answering. Something about the federal agent's bearing sent ice through his veins. This wasn't just another investigator. This was someone with real power, and he was here for blood. The station's front doors burst open as Agent Carlos Mendez led a phalanx of federal agents through the lobby. Officers scattered like startled birds, some reaching instinctively for weapons they dared not draw. The overhead fluorescent lighting caught the gleam of federal badges and the serious expressions of agents who meant business. "Nobody moves," Carlos Mendez announced, his green shirt and blue jacket identifying him as the advanced team leader. His muscular frame commanded respect as he held up federal warrants. "This facility is now under federal investigation. All personnel will remain at their stations." Captain Sophia Nakamura emerged from her office, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing that her cooperation with the federal investigation would finally expose the corruption she had witnessed for years. Stafford descended the stairs, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. "Now see here, Agent Mendez, this is highly irregular. You can't just storm into my department and—" "Chief Stafford." The voice that interrupted him carried the weight of absolute authority. The distinguished man in the blue jacket stepped forward, and every person in the lobby seemed to shrink in his presence. "I am FBI Director Marcus Blackwell. We need to talk." The name hit Stafford like a physical blow. FBI Director, not just an agent, not even a regional supervisor, but the head of the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation. Standing in his lobby, looking at him with eyes that promised swift and terrible justice. "Director Blackwell," Stafford stammered, his usual bluster evaporating. "I had no idea you were personally involved in this case. Surely there's been some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Director Blackwell said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man barely restraining himself, "is your belief that you could cover up the assault of my daughter." The words echoed through the lobby like gunshots. Every officer within earshot froze. Captain Sophia Nakamura's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Officer James Kowalski, who had been documenting evidence for weeks, felt his knees go weak. Stafford's face went ashen. "Your daughter?" "Serena Blackwell is my daughter, Chief. The young woman your officers beat unconscious during a routine traffic stop. The federal witness you've been systematically trying to discredit." Director Blackwell stepped closer, his imposing presence making Stafford instinctively back away. The protected asset whose safety was critical to national security. The bright natural light streaming through the station's skylights seemed to illuminate every detail of Stafford's crumbling facade. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as the full magnitude of his situation became clear. He had not just covered up police brutality, he had obstructed a federal terrorism investigation. He had endangered a protected witness. He had assaulted the daughter of the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. "Arrest Officer Derek Holloway and his partner, Director Blackwell," commanded. Federal agents moved with military precision through the station. Charges include civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, and obstruction of justice in a federal terrorism investigation. Derek Holloway tried to run. He made it exactly 15 feet before federal agents tackled him to the ground in the station's main corridor. His panicked screams echoed off the walls as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You don't understand," Holloway shouted desperately. "Stafford ordered us to keep quiet. He said it was just another drunk college girl making noise." "Another drunk college girl," Director Blackwell repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Agent Mendez, ensure Officer Holloway understands the federal penalty for assaulting a protected witness." Carlos Mendez smiled grimly. 25 to life, sir. No possibility of parole. Captain Sophia Nakamura approached Director Blackwell carefully. "Sir, I have extensive documentation of Chief Stafford's cover-up efforts. Internal Affairs was building a case, but we lacked the authority to—" "Captain Nakamura." Director Blackwell acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Agent Mendez briefed me on your cooperation. The federal government will ensure your safety and continued employment. Your integrity in this matter will not be forgotten." Officer James Kowalski stepped forward, his short-sleeved uniform damp with nervous sweat. "Director Blackwell, sir, I have photographs, evidence that contradicts the official reports. I've been documenting everything since the night it happened." "Outstanding work, Officer Kowalski. Your evidence will be crucial to our prosecution." Director Blackwell's acknowledgement of the young officer's courage sent a visible wave of pride through Kowalski's bearing. Stafford watched his empire disintegrate in real time. Officers he had commanded for decades were providing evidence against him. Political allies were already distancing themselves. His phone buzzed with incoming calls he dared not answer. "The scope of your corruption is impressive, Chief," Director Blackwell continued, pulling out a thick federal file. "Evidence tampering, witness intimidation, systematic cover-ups of police misconduct. My agents have been very thorough." Through the station's bright windows, Stafford could see news vans arriving. Mayor Vincent Hargrove was already holding an impromptu press conference on the steps, announcing the city's full cooperation with federal authorities and condemning any police misconduct. The station doors opened again, and Serena Blackwell entered with federal escorts. She wore a red dress and dark jacket, her posture straight and dignified despite the trauma she had endured. The young woman who had been dismissed as an attention-seeking party girl now moved with the protected grace of someone under the wing of the federal government. Stafford stared at her in shock. This was the victim he had tried to destroy, the witness whose credibility he had systematically attacked, the daughter of the most powerful man in law enforcement. "Hello, Chief Stafford," Serena said quietly, her voice carrying surprising strength. "I believe we need to discuss what really happened that night." Director Blackwell placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Serena has agreed to provide complete testimony about both her role in the terrorism investigation and the assault your officers committed. Her intelligence work has already prevented multiple terrorist attacks and saved countless lives." The revelation hit Stafford like a sledgehammer. Not only had he covered up the assault of the FBI director's daughter, but he had compromised a critical national security operation. The federal charges he now faced would destroy not just his career, but his entire life. "The terrorism cell my daughter helped expose was planning attacks on 3 major cities," Director Blackwell continued relentlessly. "Your officer's assault and your subsequent cover-up endangered that entire investigation. You put American lives at risk to protect your corrupt officers." Carlos Mendez approached with federal arrest warrants. "Chief Stafford, you're under arrest for civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to violate federal law, and endangering national security. You have the right to remain silent." Stafford's legs nearly gave out. Federal charges, multiple felonies, decades in prison, his pension gone, his reputation destroyed, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about corruption and abuse of power. "This is impossible," he whispered as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I was just protecting my officers. It was standard procedure." "Standard procedure," Director Blackwell repeated coldly, "does not include beating federal witnesses unconscious and then orchestrating elaborate cover-ups to hide your crimes." As federal agents led Stafford toward the exit, he caught sight of his reflection in the station's bright windows. The man looking back at him was finished. 24 hours ago, He had commanded respect and wielded considerable power. Now he was just another corrupt official facing the full weight of federal justice. Agent Mendez, Director Blackwell commanded, "I want every case this department has handled in the past 5 years reviewed for evidence tampering and civil rights violations. If there are other victims, I want them found and their cases reopened." "Yes, sir. We're already coordinating with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division." Serena Blackwell watched her former tormentor being led away in handcuffs. The young woman who had been dismissed and discredited now stood vindicated, her character restored and her courage recognized at the highest levels of government. "Dad," she said quietly, "thank you for believing me." Director Blackwell pulled his daughter close, his professional composure cracking slightly. "Always, sweetheart. No one hurts my family without consequences." The bright morning sun continued streaming through the station windows, illuminating the end of Stafford's reign and the beginning of a new era of accountability. Federal agents worked systematically through evidence files, while local officers provided statements and testimony. Captain Sophia Nakamura began implementing immediate reforms under federal oversight. Officer James Kowalski found himself promoted and recognized for his integrity. The corrupt officers faced federal prosecution while the honest ones received protection and support. As Stafford disappeared into the federal vehicle that would transport him to his arraignment, he realized the full scope of his miscalculation. He had tried to destroy the wrong person's daughter, and now the most powerful law enforcement official in America was personally ensuring his destruction. The federal takeover was complete, swift, and devastating. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived at Riverside Police Department. The federal courthouse blazed with harsh fluorescent lighting that left no shadow unexposed, much like the proceedings about to unfold within its walls. Former Police Chief Robert Stafford sat rigid at the defense table, his once commanding presence now diminished under the unforgiving illumination. The man who had ruled his department with an iron fist for over 2 decades now faced the systematic dismantling of his carefully constructed empire of corruption. Federal Prosecutor Elena Martinez stood before the jury in a crisp navy suit, her voice carrying the weight of justice long delayed. "Ladies and gentlemen, over the next several days, you will witness the complete unraveling of a criminal enterprise that operated under the guise of law enforcement. The defendant didn't just assault an innocent young woman, he orchestrated a conspiracy that threatened national security and corrupted the very institutions sworn to protect our communities." The bright courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Martinez outlined the government's case. Every fluorescent bulb seemed to intensify the gravity of the charges: civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and witness tampering. The natural skylight streaming through the tall windows added another layer of illumination, ensuring that every detail of Stafford's downfall would be clearly visible. Lieutenant Brian Castillo was the first domino to fall. The man who had been Stafford's most loyal enforcer now sat in the witness stand wearing his long-sleeved police uniform, the same uniform that once represented his unwavering allegiance to his corrupt chief. His transformation from loyal lieutenant to star witness represented the complete collapse of Stafford's support system. "Lieutenant Castillo," Prosecutor Martinez began, "how long have you known the defendant?" 18 years, Castillo replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've served under Chief Stafford since I was promoted to lieutenant." "And during those 18 years, did you witness systematic corruption within the department?" Castillo's shoulders sagged as the weight of his testimony began. "Yes, ma'am. Chief Stafford operated what he called the system. Officers who played along got promotions, preferred assignments, and protection when they crossed the line. Those who didn't were transferred, demoted, or forced out entirely." The prosecutor methodically guided Castillo through years of evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and cover-ups. Each revelation struck Stafford like a physical blow. his face growing paler under the bright courtroom lights. The empire he had built on fear and loyalty was crumbling with every word from his former lieutenant's mouth, specifically regarding the Serena Blackwell case. "Did Chief Stafford order you to participate in covering up the assault?" "Yes," Castillo admitted, his voice stronger now. "He told me it was just another complaint that needed to disappear. He said the girl was nobody important, just a college student looking for attention. He ordered me to make sure the other officers stuck to their stories and to discourage anyone from talking to internal affairs." Captain Sophia Nakamura took the stand next, her presence commanding respect even as she testified against her former superior. Under the harsh fluorescent lighting, her moral courage shone brighter than any commendation she had ever received. Her testimony painted a picture of systematic abuse that had poisoned the department for decades. "Captain Nakamura," the prosecutor continued, "did you have concerns about the Blackwell case from the beginning?" "Absolutely," Sophia replied firmly. The inconsistencies in the reports were glaring. Officer Holloway claimed Ms. Blackwell attacked him, but the medical evidence showed injuries consistent with her being the victim of a severe beating. When I raised these concerns with Chief Stafford, he dismissed them and told me to focus on other cases. "How did the chief typically handle cases involving officer misconduct?" Sophia's jaw tightened with righteous anger. "He had a standard playbook. First, discredit the victim by any means necessary, plant drugs, fabricate criminal histories, spread rumors about their character. Second, ensure all officers told the same story regardless of the truth. Third, intimidate witnesses and suppress evidence. I watched him use these tactics dozens of times over the years." The courtroom fell silent as Sophia described specific cases where Stafford had orchestrated cover-ups, destroyed evidence, and ruined the lives of victims who dared to seek justice. Her testimony revealed not just the assault on Serena Blackwell, but a pattern of corruption that had infected every level of the department. Officer James Kowalski's testimony proved devastating to Stafford's defense. The young officer's photographic evidence, taken at great personal risk, provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. Under the bright courtroom lighting, Kowalski presented image after image of doctored reports, planted evidence, and intimidation tactics. "Officer Kowalski," the prosecutor asked, "what motivated you to document these crimes?" "I became a police officer to serve and protect," James replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his testimony. "What I witnessed wasn't law enforcement. It was a criminal organization hiding behind badges. When I saw what happened to Miss Blackwell, when I watched Chief Stafford systematically destroy an innocent woman's reputation to cover up a brutal assault, I knew I had to act." His photographs told a story that no amount of corruption could erase. Images of Stafford meeting with officers, documents being altered, and evidence being destroyed painted an undeniable picture of conspiracy. The defense team's attempts to discredit the evidence fell flat under the weight of technical authentication and corroborating testimony. Dr. Amanda Foster's medical testimony provided the clinical foundation that demolished every aspect of Stafford's narrative. Under oath, she detailed the extent of Serena's injuries with professional precision that left no room for alternative interpretations. "Dr. Foster," the prosecutor inquired, "in your medical opinion, were Ms. Blackwell's injuries consistent with the police report claiming she attacked the officers?" "Absolutely not," Dr. Foster replied emphatically. "Ms. Blackwell suffered multiple contusions, a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and extensive bruising consistent with being beaten while defenseless. The injury patterns clearly indicate she was the victim of an assault, not the perpetrator. Anyone claiming otherwise is either medically incompetent or deliberately lying." The courtroom stirred as Dr. Foster's testimony systematically destroyed the foundation of Stafford's cover-up. Her medical expertise provided irrefutable evidence that transformed the case from he said, she said to documented fact versus deliberate fiction. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Serena Blackwell entered the courtroom, wearing a dignified red suit with a blue jacket, her presence commanding immediate attention. The harsh fluorescent lighting seemed to soften around her as she walked to the witness stand with quiet strength and unmistakable dignity. Every eye in the courtroom followed her movement, including those of her father, FBI Director Marcus Blackwell, who watched with evident pride from the gallery. Federal Prosecutor Martinez approached the witness stand with visible respect for what Serena had endured and overcome. Ms. Blackwell, thank you for your courage in testifying today. Would you please tell the court about your role as a federal witness? Serena's voice carried clearly through the bright courtroom as she began her testimony. 2 years ago, I became aware of suspicious activities among a group of students at my university. They were discussing plans that sounded like potential terrorist attacks. As a responsible citizen, I reported my concerns to the FBI and agreed to provide intelligence about their activities. The revelation sent ripples through the courtroom. Stafford's face went ashen as he began to understand the true magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just assaulted a random college student, he had brutally beaten a protected federal witness whose intelligence had been crucial to national security. Ms. Blackwell, the prosecutor continued, can you explain the importance of the intelligence you provided? The group I infiltrated was planning coordinated attacks on multiple university campuses during graduation ceremonies. My intelligence allowed federal agents to prevent attacks that could have killed or injured hundreds of innocent people. The case required my continued cooperation and protection, which is why I was in the Federal Witness Protection Program. The courtroom fell silent as the full scope of Stafford's criminal stupidity became clear. His assault on Serena hadn't just been a civil rights violation, it had compromised a major terrorism investigation and endangered a witness whose safety was crucial to national security. Serena's testimony continued with devastating precision. She described the night of her assault with clinical detail, her dignity intact despite the traumatic memories. When the defense attorney attempted to discredit her character, the prosecution's response was swift and crushing. Your Honor, Prosecutor Martinez announced, I'd like to present Ms. Blackwell's academic records, service awards, and federal commendations. The documents painted a picture of exceptional academic achievement, community service, and courage in the face of danger. Serena had maintained a perfect grade point average while serving as a federal witness, volunteered at local charities, and received multiple commendations from federal law enforcement for her intelligence work. The defense's attempts at character assassination crumbled under the weight of documented excellence. FBI Director Marcus Blackwell watched his daughter's testimony with visible pride, his own presence in the courtroom serving as a powerful reminder of the federal resources now focused on achieving justice. The man who commanded the nation's premier law enforcement agency had seen his daughter brutally assaulted and systematically discredited by corrupt officers. The personal had become political, and the political had become devastating for Robert Stafford. As Serena concluded her testimony, the prosecution presented evidence connecting Stafford's assault cover-up to his broader pattern of corruption. Financial records showed unexplained income, phone records revealed coordination with criminal elements, and witness testimony described decades of systematic abuse. The man who had once seemed untouchable now faced the complete exposure of his criminal empire. The defense's closing arguments felt hollow under the bright courtroom lighting. No amount of legal maneuvering could overcome the mountain of evidence, the parade of former allies turned witnesses, and the powerful testimony of a protected federal witness whose dignity and strength had survived everything Stafford had tried to destroy. As the court recessed for jury deliberations, Stafford sat alone at the defense table, abandoned by former allies and facing the harsh reality of his situation. The fluorescent lights seemed to burn brighter, the natural skylight more intense, as if the universe itself was ensuring that his corruption could no longer hide in shadows. The unraveling of Stafford's empire was complete. Tomorrow would bring the jury's verdict, but the moral judgment had already been rendered. Justice, so long delayed, was finally within reach. The morning sun streamed through the towering courthouse windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished marble floor as spectators filled every available seat. The fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the natural daylight, creating an almost ethereal glow in the packed courtroom where justice was finally about to be served. Judge Patricia Morrison, her silver hair catching the light, looked down at the defendant's table where Chief Stafford sat in his orange jumpsuit and blue jacket, his once commanding presence now reduced to that of a broken man. The transformation was stark. The same man who had dismissed Serena Blackwell's assault case with such callous confidence now trembled as he awaited his fate. Thomas Stafford. Judge Morrison's voice rang clear through the silent courtroom. You have been found guilty on all counts. Civil rights violations under color of law, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights, and corruption of public office. These are not merely crimes against one young woman, but crimes against the very foundation of justice itself. Director Marcus Blackwell sat in the front row, his muscular frame filling out a crisp blue jacket, his eyes fixed on Stafford with the intensity of a father who had watched his daughter suffer while this man tried to destroy her character. Beside him, Serena Blackwell wore a red blouse and dark pants, her posture straight and dignified, no longer the frightened victim, but a survivor who had helped expose systematic corruption. The judge continued, her words carrying the weight of decades of legal experience. The evidence presented in this case reveals a pattern of corruption spanning 15 years. You systematically covered up police misconduct, intimidated witnesses, falsified evidence, and perverted the course of justice. But your greatest crime was the brutal assault you orchestrated and then attempted to hide behind lies and character assassination. Stafford's attorney, a nervous man in an ill-fitting suit, had long since given up any pretense of mounting a defense. The federal case had been overwhelming, with testimony from former allies, photographic evidence, and documentation that painted a picture of corruption so deep it had infected an entire department. For the charge of civil rights violations resulting in bodily injury, Judge Morrison declared, her voice unwavering, 15 years in federal prison. For obstruction of justice in a federal terrorism investigation, 10 years consecutive. For conspiracy and corruption under color of law, an additional 5 years. Total sentence, 30 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of gasps and quiet applause. Stafford's shoulders sagged as the reality hit him. At 58 years old, this was effectively a life sentence. His pension, already frozen during the investigation, was now permanently revoked. His reputation, built over decades of public service, lay in ruins. But the justice extended far beyond Stafford himself. Lieutenant Brian Castillo, once Stafford's most loyal enforcer, had received 20 years for his role in the cover-up. Officer Derek Holloway, the primary perpetrator of Serena's assault, faced 25 years for civil rights violations and assault under color of law. Each member of Stafford's corruption network had been systematically prosecuted, their sentences serving as a warning to law enforcement officers nationwide. As the marshals led Stafford away, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the uniform he had worn with such arrogance, Serena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The man who had tried to paint her as an attention-seeking party girl was now facing the consequences of his actions. The system that had initially failed her had ultimately delivered justice in the most complete way possible. Captain Sophia Nakamura sat in the gallery, wearing her new chief's uniform with its polished insignia. Her promotion to interim police chief had been unanimous, supported by both the mayor and federal oversight. Under the bright courthouse lighting, she looked like what she had always been, an officer committed to real justice rather than institutional protection. The transformation of the police department had been swift and comprehensive. Federal oversight ensured that every policy was reviewed, every complaint system overhauled, and every officer retrained on constitutional policing. Sophia had implemented body camera requirements, independent oversight boards, and mandatory reporting of misconduct. The old culture of silence and cover-ups was being systematically dismantled. Officer James Kowalski, now wearing sergeant stripes on his short-sleeved uniform, had become the face of police reform. His courage in photographing evidence and breaking the blue wall of silence had earned him not just promotion, but recognition from the Justice Department. His testimony had been crucial in exposing the depth of corruption, and his example was now being used to train officers nationwide about the importance of constitutional policing. 3 months after the sentencing, the real scope of change became apparent. Director Blackwell stood at a podium in the Justice Department's main briefing room. The overhead fluorescent lighting mixing with natural daylight from tall windows, his imposing presence in a perfectly tailored blue jacket, commanded attention from the gathered media. "Today we announce the Serena Blackwell Initiative," he declared, his voice carrying both official authority and personal conviction. "A comprehensive federal program to combat police corruption and protect civil rights nationwide. This initiative will provide federal oversight, training, and resources to ensure that what happened to my daughter never happens to anyone else." Serena stood beside him, wearing a red suit jacket and dark pants, no longer hiding in the shadows but standing proudly as both a survivor and an advocate. The terrorism case she had helped expose was now completely resolved, with multiple arrests preventing what intelligence agencies estimated could have been devastating attacks on civilian targets. Her courage in coming forward as a witness had literally saved lives. The initiative was comprehensive and far-reaching. It established federal rapid response teams for investigating police misconduct, mandatory federal oversight for departments with patterns of corruption, and whistleblower protections for officers who reported misconduct. Dr. Bond, Amanda Foster, who had treated Serena's injuries and refused to participate in any cover-up, testified before Congress about the medical professionals' role in documenting police violence. "Medical professionals have a duty not just to heal, but to bear witness," Dr. Foster told the Congressional Committee, her white coat replaced by professional attire as she sat under the bright hearing room lights. "When we see evidence of systematic abuse, we cannot remain silent. The injuries I documented in Serena Blackwell's case were consistent with severe assault, not resisting arrest as the police reports claimed." Attorney Patricia Nguyen had expanded her civil rights practice with federal support, taking on cases nationwide where police misconduct had been covered up by corrupt departments. Her successful prosecution of Serena's case had become a template for federal civil rights attorneys, showing how systematic investigation could uncover corruption networks that had operated for decades. But perhaps the most powerful moment came 6 months after Stafford's sentencing. As spring sunlight streamed through the windows of the university's main auditorium, Serena Blackwell walked across the graduation stage, her red graduation gown flowing behind her, her cap perfectly positioned as she approached the podium to receive her degree magna cum laude. Director Blackwell sat in the front row of the packed auditorium, his eyes bright with paternal pride as he watched his daughter achieve what had seemed impossible during those dark days following her assault. The overhead lighting mixed with natural skylight created perfect visibility as Serena shook hands with the dean and accepted her diploma in criminal justice. The transformation was complete. The young woman who had been brutally beaten and then character assassinated by corrupt police was now graduating with highest honors, having turned her trauma into a catalyst for nationwide reform. Her senior thesis on police accountability had been published in law journals and was being used in police academies as a training tool. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered for photographs, Director Blackwell embraced his daughter under the bright auditorium lights, The journey from that terrible night when she was beaten unconscious to this moment of triumph had been painful and difficult, but it had ultimately revealed something powerful about both justice and resilience. Meanwhile, in a federal prison facility 3 states away, Thomas Stafford sat in his cell, wearing standard prison-issued orange clothing. The man who had once commanded respect and fear now spent his days in isolation, his fellow inmates having little tolerance for corrupt cops. His appeals had been denied, his attempts to negotiate reduced sentences rejected. The evidence against him had been too overwhelming, the federal case too airtight. His corruption network had completely collapsed. The officers who had once followed his orders out of loyalty or fear had either been prosecuted or had cooperated with federal authorities to save themselves. The political connections he had cultivated over decades had evaporated the moment federal charges were filed. The mayor's office, once protective of police misconduct, now actively supported reform measures. The systemic change extended beyond individual prosecutions. Police departments nationwide were implementing the Blackwell Initiative's requirements, knowing that federal oversight was no longer a distant threat, but an immediate reality. The culture of impunity that had protected officers like Stafford was being systematically dismantled through policy changes, training requirements, and accountability measures. As Serena began her career in federal law enforcement, following in her father's footsteps, but with her own unique perspective on justice and accountability, the impact of her case continued to ripple outward. Victims of police misconduct who had been silenced or ignored were finding their voices, supported by new federal protections and advocacy organizations. The story that had begun with a brutal assault and systematic cover-up had evolved into something larger, a demonstration that even the most entrenched corruption could be exposed and defeated when courage met justice. Stafford's empire of silence and intimidation had crumbled under the weight of truth, federal authority, and the determination of those who refused to accept injustice. Justice had been delivered, not just in the courtroom sentences, but in the systematic changes that would protect future victims and hold law enforcement accountable to the Constitution they had sworn to defend. The harsh light of federal investigation had exposed decades of darkness, replacing it with transparency, accountability, and genuine justice. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.